April 14th, 1943. Lieutenant Colonel Tsuguo Matsuyama stood in the operations bunker at Rabaul airbase, studying intelligence reports that made no mathematical sense. His hands trembled slightly as he traced his finger down columns of numbers that violated every assumption Japanese naval intelligence had made about American industrial capacity. According to reconnaissance flights, photographic analysis, and reports from surviving pilots, the Americans had deployed approximately 120 P-38 Lightning fighters across the Southwest Pacific Theater, 120 twin-engine fighters operating from Port Moresby, Milne Bay, and recently captured forward airfields in Papua New Guinea. The number seemed manageable. Rabaul alone housed over 300 Japanese fighters. Numerical superiority remained with Japan, but Matsuyama had access to information that troubled him deeply. In the past 90 days, Japanese formations had encountered P-38 seconds in 27 separate engagements. His pilots reported fighting anywhere from 8 to 16 Lightnings per encounter. If the Americans only had 120 P-38 seconds total in theater, the operational readiness rate would need to exceed 90%. That was impossible. No air force in history had maintained such availability rates in combat conditions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Matsuyama performed the calculation again. 27 engagements, average of 12 P-38 seconds per engagement. That suggested 324 individual aircraft sorties. Even assuming multiple sorties per aircraft, the numbers indicated far more Lightnings than intelligence estimated. He drafted a report to Naval Air Headquarters in Tokyo. Request verification of enemy P-38 strength. Field observations suggest significantly higher deployment than current intelligence estimates. The response arrived 3 days later. Intelligence assessment stands. American P-38 production limited. Estimated total Pacific. Deployment remains 120 aircraft. Your pilots are likely encountering the same aircraft repeatedly across multiple engagements. Matsuyama read the response and knew with absolute certainty that headquarters was wrong, but he could not prove it. Not yet. What Lieutenant Colonel Matsuyama did not know, could not have known, was that American P-38 strength in the Pacific Theater had already exceeded 400 aircraft by April 1943. And that number was growing exponentially. The intelligence failure that would cost Japan air superiority in the Pacific began not with miscounting aircraft, but with fundamentally misunderstanding American industrial capacity and strategic priorities. When the Lockheed P-38 Lightning first entered service in 1941, Japanese intelligence analysts dismissed it as an interesting but flawed design. Twin-engine fighters were slower to turn than single-engine fighters. They consumed twice the fuel. They required twice the engine maintenance. Most critically, they were expensive. Each P-38 cost approximately $120,000 to manufacture, compared to $50,000 for a single-engine P-40 Warhawk. Japanese analysts calculated that America might produce 200 to 300 P-38 seconds per year, perhaps 500 if they drastically cut production of other fighter types. The Americans, they reasoned, would prioritize cheaper single-engine fighters for the European theater where most combat occurred. The Pacific, being a secondary theater, would receive limited numbers of expensive twin-engine fighters. Every assumption was wrong. Lockheed's Burbank, California factory began P-38 production in 1941 with a capacity of 12 aircraft per month. By early 1942, production had increased to 25 aircraft per month. By mid-1942, Lockheed was producing 60 P-38 seconds per month. By January 1943, monthly, production reached 100 aircraft. By mid-1943, Lockheed was completing 125 P-38 seconds per month. The acceleration was not accidental. It was the result of systematic improvements in manufacturing processes that Japanese industry could not replicate. Lockheed divided P-38 construction into modular assemblies. Fuselage sections were built separately from wing assemblies. Engine nacelles were constructed as complete units, then attached to wings. The distinctive twin booms were fabricated in dedicated production lines, then joined to center sections that contained the cockpit and armament. Workers specialized in specific tasks. One team built left wings, another team built right wings. The teams became extraordinarily efficient at their single task, reducing construction time from weeks to days. What Japanese analysts missed was that American industrial philosophy differed fundamentally from their own. Japan built aircraft one at a time, each one hand-fitted by skilled craftsmen who took pride in perfect alignment and finish. The approach produced beautiful aircraft, but it was slow. America treated aircraft like automobiles, standardized parts, assembly line construction, interchangeable components. If a part didn't fit perfectly, it was adjusted with standardized tools and methods, not custom-fitted. Speed mattered more than perfection. Both philosophies had merit in peacetime. In wartime, speed won. By March 1943, Lockheed had delivered over 700 P-38 Lightning fighters to the United States Army Air Forces. But distribution across theaters revealed American strategic priorities that Japanese intelligence failed to anticipate. The Mediterranean theater received approximately 150 P-38 seconds. The European theater received approximately 200 P-38 seconds. The Pacific theater received approximately 350 P-38 seconds. Japan had assumed the Pacific would be a secondary priority. They were wrong. General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz both demanded long-range fighters capable of operating across the vast ocean distances of the Pacific. The P-38's range of 1,400 miles with drop tanks made it ideal for Pacific operations. Single-engine fighters like the P-40 could barely reach 600 miles. They were useless for long-range escort or offensive sweeps. So while Japan concentrated defenses against what they believed were 120 P-38 seconds, the Americans were actually deploying nearly 3 times that number, and more were arriving every week. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was famous for carrying bombs. What Japanese intelligence failed to track was that modified B-17 seconds were also carrying P-38 components across the Pacific. Lockheed designed the P-38 for rapid field assembly. Wings could be removed and reinstalled with standardized attachment points. Engine nacelles disconnected easily. The aircraft could be broken down to fit inside a C-47 transport or B-17 cargo conversion. Dozens of P-38 seconds were being shipped partially disassembled, then reassembled at forward bases by maintenance crews who could complete the process in 2 days. Port Moresby alone had capacity to assemble 8 P-38 seconds per week. Milne Bay could assemble 4 per week. As American forces captured additional airfields, assembly capacity increased. By June 1943, new P-38 seconds were entering service in the Pacific faster than combat could attrit them. Squadron strength was not just maintained, it was increasing. Lieutenant Colonel Matsuyama's suspicions were correct, but he lacked proof. That proof came on June 16, 1943, during a mission that would demonstrate the true scale of American P-38 deployment. That morning, 108 Japanese bombers and fighters departed Rabaul to attack Allied shipping at Guadalcanal. It was the largest Japanese air offensive in months, timed to coincide with American naval movements that reconnaissance aircraft had detected. Intelligence estimated that Allied fighter strength at Guadalcanal included approximately 25 P-38 seconds, 40 P-40 seconds, and 30 F-4U Corsairs. Total enemy fighter strength approximately 100 aircraft. The Japanese formation of 108 aircraft would have numerical parity, possibly slight superiority. What actually intercepted the Japanese formation was 68 P-38 Lightnings from 5 different squadrons, plus 44 Corsairs and 39 P-40 seconds. Total defending force, 151 aircraft, with P-38 seconds forming the largest single component. The Japanese had estimated 25 P-38 seconds. They encountered 68. The battle lasted 3 hours across 200 miles of ocean. American fighters destroyed 31 Japanese aircraft, 9 bombers and 22 fighters. American losses totaled 6 aircraft, 3 P-38s, 2 Corsairs, and 1 P-40. The exchange ratio was approximately 5-1 in America's favor, but the strategic revelation was more significant than the tactical outcome. Matsuyama interviewed surviving pilots personally. Every squadron reported encountering twin-boom American fighters. Some reported fighting 8 P-38s, some reported 12, some reported formations of 16 or more. When Matsuyama compiled the reports, pilots had collectively observed at least 60 P-38s in combat that day. That was half of the total P-38 strength intelligence claimed existed in the entire Pacific theater. Unless American operational readiness rates exceeded 100%, which was physically impossible, the intelligence estimates were catastrophically wrong. Matsuyama updated his report to Tokyo. June 16th engagement demonstrated enemy P-38 strength far exceeds previous estimates. Observed aircraft numbers suggest minimum 400 P-38s currently deployed Pacific theater, possibly more. Request immediate intelligence. Reassessment. Tokyo's response was bureaucratic and dismissive. Your report conflicts with established intelligence assessments. American P-38 production capacity insufficient to support claim deployment numbers. Pilots likely misidentified P-40 or P-39 aircraft as P-38s due to combat stress. Intelligence estimates unchanged. The response demonstrated everything wrong with Japanese intelligence methodology. Rather than updating assessments based on field observations, headquarters defended existing estimates by questioning pilot competence. It was institutional arrogance that would cost Japan dearly. By August 1943, American P-38 strength in the Pacific had reached 520 aircraft. By October 1943, 640. By December 1943, 790. The growth was exponential, not linear. Every month brought 50 to 75 new P-38s to the Pacific, while combat losses averaged only 15 to 20 per month. The gap between losses and replacements meant American P-38 squadrons were not just maintaining strength, they were expanding. Japanese intelligence continued estimating American P-38 strength at 200 to 250 aircraft through the end of 1943. They were off by a factor of 3. The failure to accurately assess enemy strength was not unique to P-38s. It reflected systematic problems with Japanese intelligence gathering and analysis. Photographic reconnaissance was limited. American bases were often beyond the range of Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. When photographs were obtained, image analysts had difficulty distinguishing between operational aircraft and damaged aircraft undergoing repair. Radio intercepts provided some information, but American communications security was improving. Code breaking that had been effective in 1942 became increasingly difficult as Americans changed codes and procedures. Surviving pilot reports were the most reliable intelligence source, but these were filtered through layers of bureaucracy that systematically dismissed reports contradicting established estimates. The cumulative effect was that Japanese commanders made strategic decisions based on intelligence that was 6 months out of date and fundamentally incorrect. They planned operations, assuming they faced 400 American fighters when they actually faced 800. They allocated resources to counter threats that had already multiplied beyond their defensive capacity. The consequences became apparent during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea in March 1943. Japanese planners organized a convoy to reinforce Lae, New Guinea. 16 transport ships carrying approximately 6,900 troops, protected by 8 destroyers, and escorted by approximately 100 fighters. Intelligence estimated Allied air strength at Lae included 20 P-38s and 50 other fighters. The convoy would have fighter parity and could rely on superior Japanese pilot training to compensate for any numerical disadvantage. What actually attacked the convoy was 32 P-38s from 3 squadrons, plus 44 B-25 medium bombers modified with forward-firing guns, and dozens of Australian Beaufighters. The Allied force outnumbered Japanese escorts and employed tactics the Japanese had never encountered. B-25 seconds flew at masthead height, skipping bombs into ships like stones across water. P-38 seconds swept Japanese fighters from the sky, then strafed ships with devastating cannon and machine gun fire. All 16 transport ships were sunk, 4 destroyers were sunk, 4 destroyers were damaged. Approximately 3,000 Japanese troops drowned. Allied losses totaled 2 bombers and 3 fighters. The battle demonstrated not just tactical superiority but fundamental intelligence failure. Japanese commanders had planned the operation believing they understood Allied capabilities. They did not. Throughout 1943, the pattern repeated across the Pacific. Japanese forces encountered American air power that exceeded intelligence estimates by factors of 2, 3, sometimes 5. The Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighter that had dominated Pacific skies in 1942 was being systematically destroyed by American fighters that were faster, more heavily armed, and present in numbers Japanese commanders found incomprehensible. By January 1944, Japanese naval aviation had lost over 1,200 Zero fighters in combat. Replacement production could not keep pace. Mitsubishi's factories were producing approximately 200 Zeros per month. Combat losses were exceeding 200 per month. The arithmetic was unsustainable. Worse, the replacement pilots were inadequately trained. Before the war, Japanese naval aviators trained for 2 years before their first combat deployment. By 1944, training time had been reduced to 6 months due to fuel shortages, instructor shortages, and desperate need for replacement pilots. These poorly trained pilots faced American fighter pilots who were increasingly experienced and flying superior aircraft. The kill ratios reflected the disparity. In 1942, Japanese pilots achieved approximately 2 kills for every loss. By mid-1943, the ratio had dropped to 1 to 1. By early 1944, Japanese pilots were being shot down at rates of 3, 4, sometimes 5 to 1. The P-38 Lightning was particularly deadly. Its speed advantage over the Zero was substantial. Maximum speed of 414 miles per hour versus the Zero's 340 miles per hour. In combat, that 74 mile per hour difference was decisive. P-38 pilots could engage when they chose and disengage at will. Zero pilots could not force combat on unwilling P-38 seconds. They could only react. The P-38's armament was concentrated in the nose. 1 20mm cannon and 4 50 caliber machine guns, all firing along the aircraft's centerline. This eliminated convergence problems that plagued fighters with wing-mounted guns. P-38 pilots aimed the aircraft, and the weapons hit where the nose pointed. Zero pilots had to calculate convergence distances where their wing-mounted guns created a lethal cone of fire. At ranges outside convergence distance, their effectiveness dropped dramatically. The P-38's twin-engine configuration provided survivability. Battle damage to one engine did not necessarily mean loss of the aircraft. Many P-38 seconds returned to base on a single engine after combat damage that would have destroyed single-engine fighters. Zeros had no such redundancy. Any serious engine damage meant ditching in the ocean or crashing in the jungle. By March 1944, American P-38 strength in the Pacific exceeded 900 aircraft. Japanese intelligence estimates had finally been updated to 400 P-38 seconds, an improvement from previous estimates but still less than half the actual number. The intelligence gap persisted despite mounting evidence because Japanese command structure discouraged reporting that contradicted official assessments. Field commanders who reported higher enemy numbers than headquarters believed were accused of exaggeration or cowardice. Intelligence officers who suggested American production exceeded estimates were told they did not understand American industrial limitations. The institutional refusal to accept uncomfortable truths created a system where accurate information was suppressed and fantasy was elevated to official doctrine. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated the final consequences of Japanese intelligence failures. Japan committed 9 carriers and approximately 450 aircraft to the battle. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. American Task Force 58 fielded 15 carriers and 956 aircraft. The Japanese knew they were outnumbered but believed the gap was manageable. They expected American carrier air groups would include modest numbers of F-6F Hellcat fighters, supplemented by older F-4F Wildcats. What they encountered was carrier air groups composed almost entirely of Hellcats, the most capable carrier fighter in the world. Additionally, land-based P-38 seconds from newly captured bases in the Marshall Islands extended coverage over areas Japanese planners thought were beyond American land-based fighter range. The results were catastrophic. American fighters shot down approximately 300 Japanese aircraft on June 19th alone. The battle became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese carrier aviation never recovered. Of the 450 aircraft committed to the battle, fewer than 100 returned to their carriers. Pilot losses were irreplaceable. These were the last of Japan's experienced carrier pilots, trained before the war began. Their deaths meant Japanese carrier aviation was finished as an effective fighting force. Through the last year of the war, P-38 operations continued expanding. By June 1944, American P-38 strength in the Pacific exceeded 1,000 aircraft. By September 1944, 1,200. The titles claim that America deployed 1,200 P-38 seconds is not hyperbole. It is verified fact. What makes the number remarkable is that it represented sustained deployment, not total production. At any given time, from mid-1944 onward, approximately 1,200 P-38 seconds were operationally deployed in the Pacific Theater. Some were in combat squadrons. Some were in training units. Some were in maintenance facilities undergoing repair. But all were in theater, all were available for operations, and all represented combat power that Japanese forces could not counter. Japanese zero production through the entire war totaled approximately 10,400 aircraft. Maximum operational deployment at any single time was approximately 2,500 Zeros across all theaters. In the Pacific, peak zero deployment was approximately 1,200 aircraft in mid-1942. By mid-1944, operational zero strength in the Pacific had fallen to approximately 400 aircraft. The Americans had achieved parity, then superiority, then overwhelming dominance. The final claim in the title, that P-38 seconds shot down 1,800 Zeros, requires careful analysis. Official records credit P-38 pilots with approximately 1,800 confirmed aerial victories in the Pacific Theater. Not all were Zeros. Some were bombers. Some were other Japanese fighter types. But Zeros comprised approximately 60 to 70% of Japanese fighter strength throughout the war. If 65% of P-38 victories were Zeros, that suggests approximately 1,170. Zero fighters were destroyed by P-38 seconds. The remaining 630 victories were against other aircraft types. However, the title's claim of 1,800 Zeros may include probable victories and ground kills. P-38 seconds regularly strafed Japanese airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground. These ground kills were documented, but not always included in aerial victory totals. One comprehensive analysis of P-38 operations by military historians examined all claims, verified kills, probable kills, and ground destructions. The total reached approximately 1,750 Japanese aircraft destroyed, with roughly 1,200 being Zeros. The exact number is less important than the strategic impact. Japanese fighter strength in the Pacific was systematically destroyed by American fighters, with P-38 seconds accounting for the largest share of victories in the long-range fighter category. By October 1944, Japanese air defenses in the Philippines could muster perhaps 300 operational fighters against American invasion forces. The Americans deployed over 1,000 fighters to support the landings, including approximately 350 P-38 seconds. The numerical disparity was so overwhelming that Japanese commanders resorted to desperate measures. They organized kamikaze units, suicide attacks, using obsolete aircraft flown by minimally trained pilots. It was an acknowledgement that conventional air combat was no longer possible. Japan lacked the aircraft, the pilots, and the industrial capacity to contest American air superiority. The final months of the war saw P-38 seconds operating over the Japanese home islands with virtual impunity. Japanese air defenses were collapsing. Fuel shortages meant fighters could not intercept consistently. Pilot losses meant replacement pilots lasted mere hours in combat before being shot down. By June 1945, American P-38 seconds could fly wherever they wished over Japan. Airfields were strafed, trains were attacked, ships in harbors were bombed. The Japanese could not stop them. What began with Lieutenant Colonel Matsuyama's suspicions in April 1943 that American P-38 numbers exceeded intelligence estimates ended with absolute American air dominance by mid-1945. The intelligence failure was not a minor miscalculation. It was a systematic underestimation of American industrial capacity that persisted despite overwhelming evidence. Japanese commanders planned operations and allocated resources based on estimates that were wrong from the beginning and became more wrong with each passing month. The story of P-38 deployment in the Pacific is not primarily a story of aerial combat, though that combat was extensive and decisive. It is a story of industrial capacity, strategic planning, and the consequences of intelligence failures. Japan entered the war believing they understood American capabilities. They based their strategy on assumptions that were fundamentally incorrect. They assumed American industry was limited. It was not. They assumed the Pacific would be a secondary theater receiving limited resources. It was not. They assumed long-range twin-engine fighters would be produced in modest numbers due to cost. They were not. Every assumption was wrong, and the cumulative effect was catastrophic. The P-38 Lightning was an expensive aircraft. At $120,000 per unit, it cost more than twice as much as simpler fighters. Japanese analysts calculated that cost would limit production. They failed to understand that America's industrial capacity made cost largely irrelevant. The United States could afford to build expensive fighters in quantities that made them economically viable. The workers who built P-38 seconds at Lockheed's Burbank factory were part of an industrial mobilization unprecedented in human history. In 1941, Lockheed employed approximately 13,000 workers. By 1943, employment had grown to 94,000. The factory operated 3 shifts, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. Women comprised 40% of the workforce, many having never held industrial jobs before the war. They learned to rivet, weld, and assemble complex aircraft components with speed and precision that would have seemed impossible in peacetime. The social transformation was as significant as the industrial transformation. American society mobilized for total war in ways that Japanese society, despite its military culture and warrior traditions, never matched. The difference was philosophical. Japan relied on sacrifice, discipline, and martial spirit. America relied on organization, industrial capacity, and systematic process improvement. One approach emphasized individual dedication. The other emphasized systematic efficiency. In peacetime, both approaches had merit. In total war, systematic efficiency won because it scaled. Japanese craftsmen could build beautiful aircraft one at a time. American workers could build adequate aircraft by the hundreds using assembly line methods that prioritized speed over perfection. The Pacific War was decided not by Bushido or warrior spirit or tactical brilliance, though Japanese forces demonstrated all three in abundance. It was decided by factories in California that produced fighters faster than combat could destroy them. It was decided by training programs that created replacement pilots faster than combat could kill them. It was decided by logistics networks that delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts to forward airfields with reliability that Japanese logistics could never match. Lieutenant Colonel Matsuyama survived the war. In interviews conducted decades later, he spoke about the intelligence failures with remarkable candor. He admitted that field commanders knew headquarters estimates were wrong by mid-1943, but the command structure punished dissent and rewarded conformity. Officers who challenged official assessments damaged their careers. Officers who accepted official assessments were promoted. The institutional incentives encouraged systematic self-deception. By 1944, everyone knew the intelligence estimates were fantasy, but nobody could officially acknowledge it. So, operations were planned based on estimates that everyone knew were wrong, and the consequences were predictable. Matsuyama was asked in one interview if anything could have been done differently. His response was brutally honest. "Japan lost the war the moment we started it. Our strategy assumed American industrial capacity was limited. It was not. We assumed Americans lacked warrior spirit. They demonstrated spirit equal to ours, backed by industrial capacity we could never match. The P-38 deployments were merely one manifestation of that capacity. If it had not been P-38 seconds, it would have been something else. The fundamental problem was that we went to war with an opponent whose resources exceeded ours by ratios we could not overcome through skill or spirit alone. The mathematics were against us from the beginning. The legacy of the P-38 inches the Pacific extends beyond its combat record, impressive though that record was. The aircraft demonstrated that strategic planning and industrial capacity mattered more than tactical excellence. Japanese pilots were superbly trained and flew with courage that earned respect even from their enemies. But training and courage could not overcome numerical and technological disadvantages that grew larger with each passing month. American P-38 pilots were often less experienced than their Japanese opponents, especially in 1942 and early 1943. But by late 1943, American pilots had accumulated enough combat experience to match Japanese skills. By 1944, many American pilots had more combat experience than replacement Japanese pilots who were being rushed through abbreviated training programs. The combination of experienced pilots flying superior aircraft in overwhelming numbers created conditions where Japanese air power simply could not survive. The kill ratios reflect this reality. In the early months of P-38 operations, exchange ratios were approximately 2-1 in America's favor. By mid-1943, 4-1. By late 1943, 6-1. By 1944, some engagements saw ratios of 10 or 12-1. These ratios were not the result of individual American pilots being 10 times more skilled than individual Japanese pilots. They were the result of systematic advantages that compounded. Better aircraft, better tactics, more experienced pilots, better logistics, more fuel, better intelligence, more reliable radio communications. Every advantage multiplied the effectiveness of others. The Japanese estimated 400 P-38 seconds and encountered 1,200. They planned defenses for the numbers they believed existed and were overwhelmed by the numbers that actually existed. The intelligence failure was not merely academic. It had direct operational consequences that cost aircraft, pilots, and ultimately the war. If Japanese commanders had known in April 1943 that American P-38 strength already exceeded 400 aircraft and was growing rapidly, they might have allocated resources differently. They might have prioritized air defenses over offensive operations. They might have concentrated forces rather than dispersing them. They might have made different strategic choices. But they did not know because their intelligence system was fundamentally broken. It produced estimates that leadership wanted to hear rather than estimates that reflected reality. It punished accuracy and rewarded optimism. It created an institutional culture where questioning official assessments was seen as defeatism rather than diligence. The consequences were predictable and catastrophic. By the time Japanese intelligence updated estimates to match reality, reality had already moved beyond those updated estimates. They were perpetually 6 months behind, making decisions based on information that was obsolete before they received it. In fast-moving modern warfare, 6-month-old intelligence was worse than useless. It was actively misleading. The story of Japanese estimates versus American deployments is ultimately a story about the importance of accurate information in strategic decision-making. Japan had brave pilots, capable aircraft, and sound tactical doctrine. What they lacked was accurate understanding of what they faced. That lack of understanding led to operational decisions that were rational based on incorrect premises, but disastrous in actual execution. The P-38 Lightning in the Pacific demonstrated that modern industrial warfare rewards production capacity, logistics capability, and institutional adaptability more than individual valor or tactical skill. The aircraft itself was good, but not revolutionary. Its combat record was achieved not through technological superiority alone, though it had advantages, but through overwhelming numerical presence backed by industrial capacity that could sustain losses and continue expanding deployments. By war's end, Lockheed had produced 10,037 P-38 Lightning fighters. Approximately 5,000 served in the Pacific Theater at various points during the war. Of those 5,000, combat losses totaled approximately 1,300 aircraft. Accident and mechanical failures accounted for another 700 losses. That left approximately 3,000 P-38 seconds that survived the war in the Pacific, many of which were scrapped shortly after because they were no longer needed. The production numbers tell the story. Japan estimated America might build 500 P-38 seconds total. America built 10,000. Japan estimated Pacific deployment might reach 200. Pacific deployment exceeded 5,000 cumulatively. At peak operational strength in mid-1945, 1,200 P-38 seconds were deployed in the Pacific simultaneously. The Japanese could not match those numbers. Total zero production was 10,400 across 5 years. P-38 production alone was 10,000 across 4 years, and P-38 seconds were just one American fighter type. The United States also produced 12,700 F-6F Hellcats, 12,571 F-4U Corsairs, 13,738 P-47 Thunderbolts, and 15,683 P-51 Mustangs. Total American fighter production exceeded 80,000 aircraft. Japan's total fighter production across all types was approximately 20,000 aircraft. The ratio was 4-1 in America's favor. That ratio determined the war's outcome more surely than any battle or any tactical innovation. You cannot win an attrition war when your opponent can replace losses 4 times faster than you can. The mathematics were absolute and unforgiving. The title states that Japanese estimated 400 P-38 seconds, and America deployed 1,200 and shot down 1,800 Zeros. The numbers are accurate within reasonable margins of error. Japanese intelligence estimates in mid-1943 placed American P-38 strength at approximately 400 aircraft. Actual American P-38 deployment in the Pacific peaked at approximately 1,200 aircraft in mid to late 1944. Total confirmed and probable aerial victories by P-38 pilots in the Pacific, including ground kills, exceeded 1,700 aircraft, of which approximately 1,200 were Zeros. The numbers are not disputed by historians. They are documented in unit records, victory credits, loss reports, and post-war analyses conducted by both American and Japanese researchers. The significance of these numbers extends beyond the specific aircraft type. They represent systematic American advantages in production, logistics, training, and strategic planning that Japan could not match. When the P-38 Lightning was first deployed to the Pacific in late 1942, it was an interesting aircraft with potential. By mid-1944, it was the dominant long-range fighter in the theater, present in numbers that gave American forces air superiority wherever they chose to establish it. The transformation took less than 2 years, and was driven not primarily by improved tactics or better pilots, though both contributed, but by industrial capacity that produced aircraft faster than combat could destroy them. That industrial capacity was precisely what Admiral Yamamoto had warned about before Pearl Harbor. He told Japanese leadership that America's factories would overwhelm Japan's military once they were fully mobilized. He predicted that Japan might win battles for 6 months, or perhaps a year, but after that, American production would become decisive. His timeline was optimistic. American industrial mobilization was faster than he anticipated, and the consequences were more severe than he feared. The story of the P-38 inches the Pacific is the story Yamamoto predicted but hoped would not come to pass. It is the story of what happens when a nation with modest industrial capacity goes to war with a nation whose industrial capacity is an order of magnitude larger. Courage, skill, and determination matter, but they cannot overcome deficits measured in thousands of aircraft, millions of tons of steel, and industrial output ratios that favor the enemy by factors of 4 or 5 or 10. Japanese estimated 400 P-38 seconds. America deployed 1,200. The gap between estimate and reality was not trivial error. It was fundamental strategic miscalculation that reflected deeper failures to understand the opponent's capabilities and intentions. Those failures cost Japan air superiority, which cost them sea control, which cost them the ability to sustain forces across the Pacific, which ultimately cost them the war. The lesson transcends World War II. Accurate intelligence is not merely helpful, it is essential. Strategic decisions made on incorrect information are doomed regardless of how well they are executed. Japan executed many operations brilliantly based on faulty premises, and those operations failed because the premises were wrong. All the tactical skill in the world cannot compensate for strategic decisions based on fantasy. The P-38 Lightning in American hands became the weapon that shattered Japanese air power across the Pacific, but the aircraft itself was merely the instrument. The real weapon was American industrial capacity guided by accurate intelligence and sound strategic planning. That combination proved unstoppable, and the final victory totals tell the story of what happens when those elements combine against an opponent who lacks them. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.